All right, great. All right, well, welcome everybody. We're going to dive right into it. This week we are going through the chapter in the Why Should I Believe Christianity book that talks about more specific apologetic arguments. So prior to this, we've been doing a lot of groundwork with notions of worldview or world understanding and how that plays into it. And tonight we start unpacking that a little bit more. I have up here a quote from Cornelius Van Til. He is or was an OPC theologian, and this is not in the book, but this is the methodology that Anderson is using. This is the methodology that I hold to. This is the methodology that the OPC as a whole recommends, actually. So this is how Cornelius Van Til discusses the argument for God. So I propose to argue that unless God is back of everything, you cannot find meaning in anything. I cannot even argue for belief in him without already taking him for granted. And similarly, I contend that you cannot argue against belief in him unless you first also take him for granted. And the example that he gives is like two people arguing about air, right? Somebody's arguing for the existence of air, somebody's arguing against the existence of air. Both of them are actually using air in that argument, right? Which is the greatest proof of all, by the fact that they're actually having the argument. Similar thing here going on. Okay, so bear that in mind, because that's going to be the touch point that we keep coming back to as we go through specific examples. Now, for the purposes of, this is the purposes of the chapter, Anderson uses as a foil naturalism. We might also call it materialism. And naturalism can be defined as, this is how Anderson defines it, all reality. It's the belief that all reality consists at bottom of fundamental particles and forces. Bottom of particles and forces. So, there are obviously other worldviews out there. This is going to be the default. Boy, sorry, my spelling is. This is going to be the default assumption of many people that you meet. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to be consistently naturalists all the way down. Most people are not going to want to ride that train to the very end of the line. It's a very, very bleak worldview, right? But that is going to be, a lot of people will be generally speaking operating from that basic premise. Now, I said that not everyone will follow it all the way down. There are people that will. And in the book, Anderson gives, he quotes from a philosopher who's a naturalist, he quotes from a book called The Atheist's Guide to Reality. Now, Anderson also has a full review of that book on his website. And I think it's a great review. It's really very interesting. So I would encourage you to go and read that. But he gives a section of this philosopher's answering a bunch of questions from a naturalist worldview. So I'm going to read this here, and this is kind of, so this gives you kind of an idea of what the full naturalist viewpoint is. So he asks, is there a God? No. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is. What's the purpose of the universe? There is none. What's the meaning of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Does prayer work? Of course not. Is there a soul? Is it immortal? Are you kidding? Is there free will? Not a chance. What happens to us when we die? Everything pretty much goes on before, except us. What's the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There's no moral difference between them. Does history have any meaning or purpose? It's full of sound and fury, but signifies nothing. Most people aren't going to want to go there, right? Thankfully. But those who do go there, and even those who adopt partially naturalistic views, are going to be mired in contradiction. It's not a worldview that can support itself. It's not an understanding of the world that can actually build the tools that it needs to exist. All right? So we're going to go through a couple examples of this. And again, we're going to be using naturalism as our foil. Okay? So first, and I'm just going to go off of the headings in the Anderson book, God and existence. There's going to be a lot of misspellings tonight. All right, so God and existence. So the physical things of the world we see are, there's a word for it. They're called contingent. Does anybody know what contingent means? Yeah, so contingent means, yeah, it could be, it doesn't have to exist, right? It doesn't have to be that way. So the tree outside, it didn't have to be there, right? It didn't have to grow. It might have grown 5 feet to the left, 5 feet to the right. I could go out and chop down the tree and burn it and destroy the tree. It's not a necessary thing that must exist. Now, as Anderson points out, that means, so if something's contingent, it comes into being by something else, right? Now, we can think of the physical universe as a whole as a contingent object. So the cosmos is a very large physical thing. Now, that is a big problem for naturalism, right? It doesn't believe there's anything outside of the physical universe. So why does the physical universe exist, right? It's a huge issue, actually. Now, the way they answer that, ultimately, as I said, implied before, results in contradiction. So we're going to use Stephen Hawking as an example. Does everybody know who Stephen Hawking is? I've seen a lot of heads. Okay, so yeah, he was a famous physicist. He died several years ago. Okay, so Hawking says that, Hawking is a naturalist. He says the universe came into being from the Big Bang. Okay? And the question is, oh, well, where did the Big Bang come from then? Well, the Big Bang, according to Hawking, came from quantum fluctuations. Okay, where did those quantum fluctuations come from? Well, Hawking says, you see, the quantum fluctuations came from meta-laws. Meta-laws that are outside of space and time and anything physical. Well, where did those meta-laws come from? Why are they the way they are? You want to know what his answer is? He's like, I don't know. I mean, really, it is just like, I have no idea why it's like that. We don't know. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. Big problem, right? Not just the issue of, well, that's just the way it is and isn't actually a rational answer. It kind of goes against the whole premise of naturalism, right? So he says start smuggling stuff in from other worldviews, this idea that there is something beyond the physical world that's guiding it. Now, go back a second to what I just said about it not being actually a reason for just saying, let me rephrase this. Saying if things are just there, then there's no basis for reason or intelligibility. Does that make sense? Getting blank stares. Okay, so there's nothing to. Let me just read this off because this will probably be a little bit clearer instead of me trying to summarize myself in the moment. So essentially, Hawking makes a partial adoption of the Christian worldview, right? He's saying, all right, there's something beyond the physical. But that partial adoption isn't sufficient, right? He's trying to build things without God's rationality or power or goodness, and it can't be sustained. So if things just are, then there's no basis for reason or intelligibility. Okay? Brute facts are inherently without reason or meaning. That's why they're brute facts. They're the point where they come to where it's like, it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. There's nothing to define them, to stabilize them, to hold them together in relationship. So intelligibility becomes impossible in that sort of world. Or it's just reduced to an illusion. Okay? Now, Anderson says, people might think, okay, well, I see how naturalism doesn't work in the issue of existence. But what about non-Christian theists? What about Islam, for example? Can it answer the issue of existence? Well, no. Here's one answer to that. So the world displays aspects of unity and diversity. Okay, so we'll use the category of electrons as an example. So there's this category of electrons. It's one thing. But there are also individual electrons that exist, and they all behave like electrons. Last week I used the example of humanity. We're all part of one thing called humanity, and yet we're all individuals. There's unity and diversity. That's actually a very deep philosophical problem, and it's one that goes all the way back to the Greeks, and really outside of Christianity, there's not been a sufficient answer for it. Now, Christianity, of course, has that answer because we understand that at the base of all things is God, and God is Trinity. He is unity and diversity together. That's the only thing that can actually answer the unity and diversity that we see analogically in creation. So this type of understanding and argument works against all types of false worldviews, right? Not just naturalism, that's what we're going to be focusing on, but it works against false theisms as well. That's a lot of information. Let me pause there and see if people have comments or questions about anything I just said. Okay, we'll go on to the next example. So, yes, go ahead.
I don't understand. Can you explain that a different way?
Sure, which part?
This electrons thing.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's unity in the electrons in the fact that if I go and grab 3 electrons, right, they'll all have the same properties. They'll all behave like electrons, they'll all have the same mass, they'll all have the same charge, and yet they're 3 separate things. They're 3 separate individual particles, right? So those particles have aspects of unity, right, in that their characteristics are the same, but they have aspects of diversity in that they're individual electrons that can be separated. So what brings both the unity and the diversity together into a coherent whole? That's the question. If you don't have the Trinity, you are forced to say it's either unity is at base. When you get down to the core of everything, everything's just one unity, right? Or if you get down to the core base, everything is diversity. That's a massive problem either way you go. If you have unity, right, you can't distinguish between things. You can't actually have knowledge. Everything is just an illusion in the idea that there are separate things out there. If you have diversity, kind of the same problem, opposite direction. Now you have just complete chaos. Nothing is interconnected in any meaningful way. You just have this extreme atomization of everything. So what brings the two concepts together into a meaningful whole? That's something only that can be done analogically through the Trinity. Does that make a little more sense?
So why can't you have like some little bit of each?
Well, that's a great question. Why can't you have a little bit each? So if you have, let's say you start off with unity as your base. At the core foundation of everything is unity. Why can't you have diversity there? How does diversity arise from pure unity?
Why do we need everything to have? I guess I don't understand the idea of unity. Unity is like everything is the same. Is that what you're saying?
So yeah, so getting down, the question is again, what's the fundamental state of all reality, right? And this is a tricky concept to wrap your head around at first because we're not usually thinking in these categories. It does make more sense the more you kind of play around with the idea. But if unity is at the bottom, if everything is unified, then there's no way for diversity to arise, right? If everything is inherently diverse at its core, there's no way for unity to arise. Does that maybe make a little bit more? It's okay if you don't get it right. We can talk about it more.
Are you like trying to like understand where all this came from, or because we observe like some things are unified.
Yep.
Things are the same, things are different.
That's right.
So we see that.
Right, that's right, and we take it for granted usually, right? And which is like, oh yeah, there's unity and diversity in the world, right? The question is, when you actually go back a couple steps and figure out where does that unity and diversity come from? Everybody agrees there's absolutely unity and diversity in the world. We're not arguing that everything is truly unified or is truly atomized. Although those are philosophical debates that occurred in history, right? You'll have people saying at base everything is unified, right? It seems, but then how do you get diversity? It's kind of a mystery. We don't have an answer to it. That's why it's this intractable philosophical problem. But we can talk about more about offline because yeah, it is kind of a tricky question. Yeah. Did I see another hand or just yeah?
I was just wondering if numbers would be a good example of that. Like numbers couldn't exist if there was only unity, because like a number is a number, but there's diversity in numbers.
Yeah.
So if there's not both, then math doesn't function, physics doesn't function. Like there's no reality. Mm-hmm. So it has to be both.
Yep, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And you know, the question of numbers is also, we didn't specifically talk about it, but it kind of comes into play here with, you know, this notion of these non-physical, non-material meta laws, like what are they, where do they come from, what are the way they are. It's kind of similar to math, right? And yeah, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but it is an interesting topic about, you know, what are numbers and where do they come from. I think it kind of points you in the same direction where you have to adopt something like these are non-physical abstract things that really exist. Yeah. Great questions. Yeah.
So just make sure I'm understanding this properly. So you're saying since God is the foundation of all reality itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because God is triune, that explains something we fundamentally know about reality itself, is that like these principles do exist. Like there is differences between things.
Yep.
But there's also sort of like identical similarities, if you will, like between things as well. And they can't both, like one of those things theoretically, you can't have, how do I say, like, kind of like we were talking about earlier, like if it was just unity, then it would have to be just unity. It can't really be unity. And if it's just diversity, everything just has to be different.
Yes.
So you have to find a way to make sense of, but we know that's not the case. Like there has to be an intersection.
Correct.
The answer to that is
Correct. Correct. And to clarify this, because I think sometimes maybe people get caught up with this, we're not saying that you can find pictures of the Trinity in the natural world exactly, right? It's the unity and diversity that we see in creation is analogical to the ultimate unity and diversity we see in the Trinity. Yeah, yeah, great questions. Okay, next we'll go on to God and values. Okay, so we all make value judgments. We all have, we assign values to different things. Some of those values are just personal preferences, right? Like, so I like, David and I were just talking about music. I like Jimmy Buffett. David Schexnayder is a monster and doesn't like Jimmy Buffett. So yeah, I mean, those are personal preferences, personal assigning of values. But there are things that we assign values to that we would agree are not reducible to personal preferences, right? So the examples that Anderson gives are antibiotics. So he says antibiotics are good, right? Holocaust was evil. Those are not personal preferences, right? We are appealing to higher standards when we make those types of claims. Now, objective values presuppose objective standards of goodness, right? So they can't be reducible to human feelings or preferences. They appeal to a concept of perfection, right? And yet, you probably don't think that the universe is perfect, right? You probably have not found something perfect in this world, right? So if we're saying it is imperfect, we're appealing to a standard beyond it. Again, that makes perfect sense because Christianity is true, right? So so God is absolutely perfect, and He is the standard we can appeal to, right? Or we do appeal to. Now, the problem for naturalism here, of course, is they can't have objective standards, right? There's nothing else but the universe. There's nothing else but human interpretation. Remember last week we talked about how the unbelieving worldview, one aspect of it is that there are these brute facts that just are. There's no reason behind it. There's no meaning behind it. That's just how things are. And they need to be given coherence and meaning through human interpretation. Okay? Human interpretation can't give an ought. You ought to do this. You ought to value this. You ought not to value this. You ought to think this way. You ought not to think that way, right? If all things ultimately reduce to some chaotic, well, maybe not chaotic, but some, let me rephrase that. If all things reduce to some ultimately meaningless or reasonless brute fact, then everything downstream from that is an illusion, right? You can't appeal to the brute fact as your standard, okay? All right, so closely related to God and values, we have God and morality. Okay, sometimes I like to listen to like a political podcast that takes kind of a left view of things, just to kind of hear what they think and how they approach stuff. I'm sure they're not Christians, and yet I'm always struck at how they work so strongly from a moral framework, right? They have very, very strong opinions about what's right, what's wrong, how the world should be, right? It's a big problem. It's a big problem for naturalism, right? It's not a big problem for Christianity, big problem for naturalism. Now, for the same reason we just talked about, right? There's no ultimate standard to appeal to. Now, I sometimes think when we hear this type of argument, people get confused. I remember reading, this was he was basically an internet author. He was a Roman Catholic. He then apostatized from Roman Catholicism, but he wrote this thing about how when he was younger, he was talking to an atheist that he knew, and he said, the problem is the atheists have no reason to be moral, and the atheist said, well, what are you talking about? Like, I have a lot of reasons to be moral. I don't want to live in a world where people murder each other because they might murder me, or they might murder my family, or I don't want to live in a world where we're stealing all the time because then I have to, always worry about protecting my stuff. And he's like, I never thought, and the writer who was Roman Catholic was like, I never thought of it like that. That's a really good answer. That's not a really good answer. That's a total misunderstanding of what's actually being said here, right? Will atheists say, or naturalists say, you should not kill people because we don't want chaos? Yeah, absolutely they'll say that, right? That's not a moral lesson, right? That is a pragmatic suggestion. That's saying, I don't like this thing personally, and in order to not go there and get the thing I do want, this is what I want everybody to do. That's very, very different from saying, if you murder somebody, that's wrong, that's evil, right? Two extraordinarily different things. And some naturalists will agree that they don't have any kind of basis for morality. So I'm going to read another quote here. This is from a philosopher who, this is quoted in the book, who would write a column for a magazine called Philosophy Now. And this is from 2010. He penned an article entitled Amoral Manifesto. And he explains that he has become a, quote, hard atheist. Okay, so here he is explaining what hard atheism is. The long and short of it is that I became convinced that atheism implies amorality, meaning no morality. And since I am an atheist, I must therefore embrace amorality. The religious fundamentalists are correct. Without God, there's no morality. But they are incorrect, I still believe, about there being a God. Hence, I believe there's no morality. Now, why do I accept hard atheism? I was struck by the salient parallels between religion and morality, especially that both avail themselves of imperatives or commands, which are intended to apply universally. In the case of religion, and most obviously theism, these commands emanate from a commander, and this all people call God, as Aquinas might have put it. The problem with theism is, of course, the shaky grounds for believing in God. But the problem with morality, I now maintain, is that it is even a worse shape than religion in this regard. For if there were a God, his issuing commands would make some kind of sense. But if there is no God, as of course atheists assert, then what sense could there what sense could be made of there being commands of this sort? In sum, while theists take the obvious existence of moral commands to be a kind of proof of the existence of a commander, i.e. God, I take the non-existence of a commander as a kind of proof that there are no commands, i.e. morality. That is an incredibly sad statement, right? I don't know, I honestly don't know how you can say that and truly mean it, and I don't think he can say it and truly mean it, right? I don't think in his bones he really thinks that, you know what, rape, it's just a preference. You know, it's not right, it's not wrong, whatever. I don't think anybody actually thinks that deep in their soul, okay? What is so, I mean, what is so horrifying about it is that, and it shows the depth of sin, right? That this man would rather say, I don't think murder's wrong. I don't think anything can be wrong, rather than say, I believe in the Lord, right? That just, I mean, that is, I don't know, I mean, that is just a shocking, deep blindness of sin, right? That you're even going to deny the nature of sin and just say, do whatever. It's just really, it's really stunning. Now, are most going to go that way? No, they're not going to go that way, right? Most naturalists you talk to, most atheists, are not going to want to say that. Right? What you can point out is that they are being inconsistent, that their worldview, in fact, drives them to that very point. It is only the Christian worldview that makes sense of the world. Okay? So let me pause there. Comments or questions, because that's a lot too. Yeah, Evan.
Where does the God and God conversation fit into this? Because that's what you often hear in the morality conversation, especially in kind of the more physics-based kind of like that.
We'll talk about God and science here in a minute, where that might be a little bit more apropos. Is there something, because I don't usually think of God with gaps in relation to morality, but do you have a question?
Well, yeah, just because I can imagine someone saying, like, just because, sure, my logic for morality as an atheist is inconsistent, but doesn't necessarily mean that what you're posing is correct in terms of your understanding of morality. Well, like, that's not the only solution to why morality could be a thing.
I mean, I would say that if somebody said that to me, I would say, look, what I'm saying is that you as an atheist have no basis for morality, right? It essentially reduces to your personal preference. That's not what morality is, right? So your worldview simply can't support morality, right? Christianity, because God is perfectly righteous, perfectly good, because he is the creator, he can assign morality, right? He is the foundation for our human morality. And that's how I would answer the question. Yeah, Dan.
This is less of a question, but just an interesting kind of 5-minute interaction I have with someone at work.
Yeah.
We're talking about morality, and he's like, my framework is not that
And the response to that is, well, okay, so you're appealing to one transcendent standard there, which is don't impede on other people's freedom, I guess is how we would phrase it, right? Now, I don't think that's a very good standard, but nevertheless, they're still appealing to some sort of standard. Where do they get that standard from, right? Assuming that they're an atheist, right, in this scenario. Everything is just matter in motion, right? There's nothing out there for the atheist saying, you ought to do this. It's just how things act. So I would again say that's completely inconsistent to your actual view of and understanding of reality. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I understand the morality argument.
Yeah.
Can I take one step back to the illusion thing?
Sure.
Do you mean like it's just devoid of meaning? Like
In which part? In values.
you mentioned illusion. I didn't get that part. Do you mean it's devoid of meaning?
Yes, that's right. So I would say that if you let me hold on to that because I'm just going to talk about God and reason, and I think it comes out a little bit clearer in that section. So if I don't answer it sufficiently in this next part, raise your hand again, and then I'll try to take another stab at it. Okay, so next up, let's see here. Okay, next up, God and reason. Okay, it's getting far away. All right, so naturalists often like to appeal to reason, right? But they don't often realize that reason itself depends on God. Just as morality depends on God, reason depends on God. How are we taught? What do we mean by reason? Anderson kind of defines it this way: the ability to judge between truth and falsehood, boy, I can't even read my own handwriting here, to have knowledge of the world using logical inferences, to evaluate evidence, to decide what's reasonable and unreasonable. That's what we're talking about when we're referring to reason. So now few of us, very few of us actually reflect on the use of reason. I didn't really think about reason until I started reading certain apologists like Van Til or Greg Bahnsen. But it's actually quite a remarkable ability, right? We can even reason about our reason. Like that's what we're doing right now. And it's kind of what he says in the book. We're the only creatures on this earth that reason in this way. So how does it come about? Where does reason come from? So Christianity says the ultimate reality is a rational person. Right? He knows and understands how every truth relates to every other truth. Just as morality has its basis in him, so does reason. Naturalism, however, must say that reason comes from non-reason, right? That's what I meant by brute fact and how it kind of goes to an illusion. In the Christian understanding, God gives meaning to instantiated facts, right? Without that, you have facts, and then, of course, there's a secondary interpretation, human interpretation. In the naturalist worldview, it's facts, and human interpretation is ultimate. Okay? But there's nothing behind it. There's no reason behind it. There's no meaning behind it. It just is. Okay? Let's see. There's no standard. This is hopefully not too repetitive how I'm phrasing this, but the universe doesn't have a mind, right? It doesn't have an intellect or rational faculties. There's no standard of reason to appeal to. So naturalists will say, well, humans just evolved over time to have reason, but there's a big problem with that. I mean, evolution doesn't care about truth. It's not truth-directed. It's just survival-directed, according to them, right? It undermines their position. They don't really have a basis, again, for reason. Anderson talks about how there's many organisms in the world that survive and reproduce far better than humans and don't care about reason, don't care about truth. And then it's not difficult to come up with examples of survivability that is not associated with truth in any way. So I don't think he gives the example in the book, but he gives it somewhere else where he talks about, you can imagine somebody who thinks, a human ancestor that thinks, well, tigers are my friends, right? And the best way to meet them is to hide from them, right? They're going to survive from the tigers, right? But that's not a rational answer. So again, you can come up with multiple examples like that, and it's just to show that evolution, as it's presented, is not truth-directed. It's merely survival-directed. Let's see. So, he goes on a little bit more. He says, moreover, there are several reason-dependent abilities like advanced calculus, music, philosophy, poetry, that don't give any obvious survival and reproduction benefit. One aspect of this is logic. So Anderson has a very good paper called The Lord of Non-Contradiction that I would highly recommend you guys read. He doesn't talk about logic specifically in the book, but he lays it out very nicely in the paper. So in the paper, he talks about how, now he doesn't matter, for those of you who know a little bit about logic, there's different kinds of logic. It's not really important to us. It works for any type of logic, if that's something you're interested in. But his argument is essentially this. Logic are truths. They're truths about truths. Oops. Truths about truths. In fact, they're true propositions about propositions. Does that make sense? That's what logic is. Okay. They're necessary truths. They're non-physical. They have intentionality. All of those things point to a mind. Right? So his argument is that logic, the only thing that works for logic is that logic comes from the divine mind. Right? Propositions they're not physical things. They don't just exist out there. They're products of the mind. Okay, so I'm going through that very, very quickly. It's like a 20-page paper, so read it if you want the details. But again, it's going back to the idea that the naturalist doesn't have a basis for logic. He uses logic, right, because he's made in the image of God. But he can't actually explain it. Only the Christian worldview can do so. Okay, so let me pause here. Does that answer the question, or do I need to answer it a little bit in more?
Puzzling over some earlier thing you said.
The illusion?
This model with the arrows.
Uh-huh.
Why do we have these two different, I don't understand the two different systems, because in the second facts, arrow, interpretation, why don't we just put God, arrow, facts, human interpretation? God is the origin of these facts.
Correct.
Oh, okay, that's what the top one is.
Yeah. So the top one is the Christian understanding, right? The Christian understanding. This is the non-Christian.
But so non-Christian, Christian would be like God, whatever, establishes the facts.
Mm-hmm.
Whether Newtonian physics or Einstein's relativity or whatever, and then we interpret it, and then
That's correct. You're right. So the meaning comes before the facts. It's given by God. In the naturalist worldview, there's nothing to give meaning to the facts, right? The facts simply are. They're just there somehow. And so the meaning needs to come from humanity, because in their understanding, humanity is the only rational agent that can give anything meaning.
but they're not like mutually exclusive, because we ourselves, Christian scientists or Christian.
Sure, and that's why it's saying that's not to say that human interpretation doesn't exist, right? It's saying that it's subsidiary to the ultimate meaning that God gives. In the naturalist understanding, it is the ultimate interpretation because there is no other interpretation.
To the order
Correct.
of the, whatever, physics or chemistry.
Yeah, that's right. So does that make sense? So going back to the illusion here, right? these facts come from non-reason. Let's put it this way. They come from non-reason, right? Reason is a production of the mind, right? There's no, in the naturalist worldview, they don't believe there's any kind of mind out here giving these facts. So they come from non-reason. However, suddenly they're supposed to somehow result in reason, right? That reason is an illusion for the naturalists. They have to say that. There's nothing there to bridge this gap between reason and non-reason. Does that make sense? That's okay. That's okay. We can talk about it more if you. Yeah. Yeah. We could talk about it a little bit more after. Yeah. Any other questions about that? Because it is, especially if this is the first time you're being exposed to it, it can be confusing. No? Okay. Let's talk about, okay, what's up next? God and, oh, I'm running out of room here. God and mind. So we've kind of touched upon this a little bit. So mind, as I just said, is a prerequisite for reason, right? Rocks don't use reason. Trees don't use reason. They don't use logic. Conscious minds are needed. So how do we have consciousness? Again, a big problem for the naturalists, not just the fact that they deny that there is an ultimate mind, they deny God, but our minds, our human minds, are actually a big problem for naturalists, right? Again, remember what they believe. I'm not going to flip it around, but everything reduces down to particles and forces, okay? Well, again, physical particles have mass, they have energy, they have size, but that's a completely different set of characteristics than the mind, right? Mind involves thoughts, feelings, experiences. So ultimately, naturalists start denying that we have minds distinct from matter. I'm going to read from the first atheist philosopher, and this is from Anderson's Review. So he writes, ultimately, science and scientism are going to make us give up as illusory the very thing conscious experience screams out at us the loudest and the longest. The notion that we think our thoughts are about anything at all, inside or out of our minds. Did you guys catch that? So Alex Rosenberg is his name. Again, a consistent naturalist. He's really trying to ride the train to the end of the line. He says, in the end, you don't actually have thoughts. Right? It's an illusion that you are thinking right now. And he kind of mentioned that in that list of questions where he said, do we have free will? No. How could you, right? If everything is just physical particles, it all reduces down to physics, right? Physics doesn't think. Particles don't think. So whatever you're doing, it's just an illusion. It's not real. Again, that completely undermines his own position. If he's not actually thinking, if he's not actually using rational thoughts, then why come to the conclusion he's coming to? Okay. Another element that is a big problem is the idea of, oh, my apologies. Okay. All right, I'm just going to continue on. Let's see here. Last one. God and science. Okay. So, science depends on a host of assumptions. Anybody want to take a crack at what some of those assumptions are?
Consistency in nature.
That's a great one. Yep, consistency in nature. Anybody want some others? What? Time? Okay, yep. Anything else? Moral duty, to be truthful and careful. The idea that it's good to understand things, how things work. The notion that we ought to pursue truth, that there's this norm out there that we should follow. The idea that our senses give us accurate empirical information about the world. We take that for granted. but that's not something that can be proven with science, right? And as you mentioned, the fact that the uniform is ordinary and rational, right? If I drop this, gravity's going to pull it down, right? It's not going to be next time it's going to float up. Why is that? You want to take a stab at it? When I first heard that argument, I thought, well, because there's laws that do that, right? Which doesn't really answer the question, right? What are those laws then? Where do they come from? Why don't they change? Let me pause there. Does anybody have questions about that? No? Okay. Okay. So the philosopher, so he was, well, he is probably an atheist. There's some debate on it. But David Hume, has anybody heard of David Hume? Okay. Yeah, so Greg Bahnsen uses Hume to good effect in that Hume showed that there's really no rational reason to expect uniformity in nature. Right? It's called the problem of induction. And there is no answer for that in naturalism. It remains the problem of induction, why things continue in a uniform fashion. We won't go through the whole thing, but what it boils down to is, yeah, there's no actual rational reason for uniformity to exist. It's a mental habit, right, that we pick up through our lives. But again, according to the naturalist worldview, the atheist worldview, there's no reason for that to be true. Now, there's certain findings in science that naturalists can't properly explain. Anderson talks about fine-tuning. Does anybody know, has anybody heard of fine-tuning, the fine-tuned constants? Does anybody know that argument? Somebody want to tell me what it is? Yeah.
Is that the same as the teleological argument where all the constants in the universe are so finely tuned that if they were off by a septillion of a degree, then the whole universe would go out of proportion?
Yeah, that's basically it. So yeah, there's a certain constants in nature that are not derived from any kind of mathematical equation. It's just the value that those things are. Things like gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces. You can find, there's probably some debate about which ones should be considered fine-tuned, but you usually find like 25 or 26 values that are categorized that way. And yeah, they're numbers that are not like round, like easy round numbers like 1, 2, 3. It's 0.1237895 blah, 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 blah. And if they're off by just a little bit, it makes life impossible, intelligent life impossible in the universe, right? So that has been, that's, again, quite the problem for naturalism. There are two main answers to it. One is, I don't know, like it's just the way it is. It's amazing how much it comes back to that answer when you dig down deep enough. The second one, does anybody know what the second answer is? Yeah.
Is it the infinite reality?
Yes, it is. It is multiverse. So the concept that ruined the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the very same thing that is apparently the best answer naturalists can give for fine-tuning. The multiverse is, well, why don't you tell me, what's the multiverse? Or any movie fans out there, you can tell me what the multiverse is.
Basically, there are an infinite possibility of realities. So the idea that we live in the Goldilocks reality is possible because you roll the dice an infinite number of times, you'll eventually get the result you want.
That's right. So those 25, 26 constants, atheists look at it and go, like there's not, you can't get it on one shot, right? That's just not going to happen. It's too fine-tuned. So yeah, the idea is, well, okay, there must be a multiverse then. There must be an infinite number or near infinite number of multiverses, and all those multiverses have different values, and we happen to be in the one that has the right values, right? What's the problem with this? I mean, beyond all this other stuff, right? It still doesn't account for reason, for logic, for morality, for uniform. Put that aside for a minute. What's the problem just within the multiverse? Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like the problem is that if there are infinite universes or possibilities, then there technically should be an infinite possibilities that work.
Yeah. So they would. Yeah. So that, I mean, that's what.
Infinity is
That's right.
right? So
Yeah, so let me, if I'm understanding you correctly, so there's an infinite number of things, a different number of scenarios going on. Is that where you're kind of going with it?
like essentially, like, if it comes down to like we live in the Goldilocks universe that just so happened to work, like because it's infinite, shouldn't there also be an infinite amount that also work?
Yeah. So, and that's kind of getting towards it, right? So if the multiverse is correct, it means there's an infinite number of you out there that are slightly different, or exactly different, but there's something a little off with the world, right? Or it's exactly the same. It's just a complete copy. But it goes deeper than that, right? If the multiverse is true, that means that there is an anthropomorphic duck out there named Scrooge, who is a rich duck and goes on treasure hunting adventures with his 3 nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. It means that every DuckTales story is real, or nearly every DuckTales story is real. It means Bluey, and I love Bluey, but Bluey is a real Australian dog out there in the universe that's doing exactly the same things and having exactly the same conversations that she's having with her family on the TV show. It means that Santa Claus is truly real. Not maybe, like there's a possibility. No, the actual conclusion of multiverse, taken seriously, is it is 100%, and there's almost an infinite number of Santas out there. Again, this goes back to the notion of the man who was denying morality, right? People that hold to multiverse, and they're not just they're not tinfoil hat-wearing people. I mean, these are serious physicists that are taken seriously in their field. They reduce themselves to saying, I'm not going to acknowledge God. Santa's real. Bluey's real. Wolverine's real. Spider-Man's real. God is not real. I'm not going to, I mean, it is both funny on one level and sad, and incredibly sad and tragic on another. Yeah, Alexander.
It also introduces a problem because instead of explaining the world that they live in, they then have to explain not only the world that they live in, but how all the rest of those worlds
Yes, yeah,
come into being, the rules, who made the rules, the logic, and all
right.
that goes into perspective.
Yeah, it goes, yep. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it goes back to that notion of, okay, you need some sort of meta laws still to kind of kick off the multiverse. Where do those meta laws come from, right? And the answer again boils down to I don't know. It's just the star, right? So, all right. The last section. Sorry, we're running a little late here. The last section that Anderson asks: does God need to be proven? Does he actually need to be proven? He says, you know what? It's plainly evident to everyone that God exists. Scripture says that, right? Romans 1. You can see, you know that God exists by the things that he created. Calvin talks about how each and every one of us has a sense of the divine in him. We know that God is there, that we are creatures, that we owe him our obedience and love. So, you know, what that means is there's no honest skeptic, right? We say that often, or somebody says they're an honest skeptic. There's no honest skeptic. There's just deceitful hearts, right? And they're deceitful hearts that will drive people to say insane things, right? They'll drive people to say, yeah, Bluey is really a talking dog out there. Yeah, it doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with murdering somebody. Yeah, you know what? Reason is, there's no actual reason in the world. It's just matter in motion, and it's all an illusion, right? It is, I hope you see that it starts breaking down the person, right? It's not as though somebody is just neutral and saying, I don't know, I gotta figure this out, but I'm a fairly good person. I can use these tools to figure out what the truth is. No, we know what the truth is deep down. And when we deny it, we start denying our humanity. we start denying the things that make us us. And it's a scary, sad, very tragic thing when we turn away from the Lord. So yeah, I will end there. Comments, questions?